From what I could see, nobody but the occasional mowing company had been there in a very long time. I couldn't help but be in awe of the place. The vibrant pink and blue paint had long faded from its soaring towers, and the massive porch was beginning to sag in a few places. Before I entered, I wanted to take in every bit of the wonderful facade as I could. Around the back was the remnants of the old horseshoe pit and, what I was told, my grandfather's Ford pickup. Although the big house had long seen its best days, I knew I hadn't seen anything that could have compared. Maybe one of those beautiful Victorian mansions in San Francisco. Even those would be dwarfed in comparison to this. When I was ready, we climbed the concrete steps and entered through the back entrance. From the moment we cracked the door, we were overwhelmed by a hideous smell coming from inside. We assumed it was a normal part of having a house sealed for so long and continued with our search. Everything appeared as if it had been left where it was on my grandmother's last day, almost like a time capsule or a museum. The lights were even still working. Only later did I discover that my mother had been paying the bills all these years in hopes someone would return and live there someday. Walking from room to room and seeing all the beautiful antique furnishings, I couldn't stop wondering why I had never been told about the house. Regardless of our frequent estrangements, I would have helped my mother with the upkeep of it. It was downright insane to me to leave such a beautiful place to rot. Then again, my mother's strange ways were the main reason for our frequent falling outs. As we made our way to the second floor, the smell only got worse. I suggested we cut our visit short and just take a quick look around. Every door was closed, so I went for the closest one and stuck my head in. This must have been a guest room or spare. Upon the bed laid a beautiful and elaborate quilt easily over 100 years old. My aunt was going through a cedar chest in the room next to me. I joined her and we discovered another much older photo album and decided to bring back with us to look at later. She closed the door behind us and I made my way toward the last room. Unfortunately, the closer I got to the door, the stronger the smell got. I was reluctant to open it, but I thought if the poor critter was where I could get to it, I'd take it outside and give it a good burial. Cracking the door, the stench slapped me in the face, and I lost focus for a moment. When I regained my composure, I was met with a terrible sight. Before me was not a dead forest creature, but a human being. The bloated body, now unrecognizable, laid curled up silently on the bed. I could feel my knees begin to buckle, so I turned as quickly as possible away and out of the room. My aunt was confused by my behavior and stuck her head in before yanking it out, quickly again. We both ran down the stairs where the smell was less potent, and I called 911. The officers spent a few minutes in the room before coming back out with a small piece of paper and a driver's license. One of them joined us at the table where we were sitting and asked a few questions about my mother. This made me nervous, and I began demanding he explain himself. A serious look came across his face, and he told us that the body appeared to belong to my mom. I didn't want to believe it at first, but when he handed me her license, I knew it was true. My aunt and I held each other for a long time and cried. The officer gave us a few moments before interjecting himself again. Then he asked me if I knew why she would take her own life. I had naturally assumed my mom had died in her sleep. She was an older woman, but the note he handed me made everything clear. She had been depressed for a long time because of being at odds with each other, and the last time we spoke, some things were said, and she feared she couldn't take it back. The morning after our argument, she decided to return to the only place that she'd ever been happy. Although she claimed to not be sure of what she was going to do at the time, the poor state of the house just sent her over the edge. The last sentence asked that I not blame myself for her death, and that I move on with my life. The ending read simply, "Goodbye, Mom."
30
A couple of weeks later, after everyone had time to deal with their grief, I brought the remaining family members together. After seeing the old house and realizing how the poor condition of it hurt my mother, I proposed we try to raise the money to renovate it. In light of what had just occurred, I wanted to at least try to create something positive from our tragedy. I was given their blessings and went to work.
No one can tell us
It
not
took
to.
some time,
We already
but
broke the rules with
on
the
the first
super
day of spring
mega
2018, the
Minions has
Historical
spawned.
Society allowed me to lead the first tour of the newly restored Wheeler Mansion. A great day could have been much better had my mother been there with me. No matter our differences, it was her who inspired me and the one who truly made it all possible. For the hunting season of 2017, I got in on a lease with a guy from work.
Your friend's tickling me.
I didn't have time to check the area out before the season started, so the inevitable occurred and I got lost my first day. That morning I left the camp just before dawn. I'm not the kind that hunts from a stand. I'm your traditional stalk and shoot type of hunter. Since I wasn't familiar with the lease and I stupidly left the GPS back at camp, I had to stick to the main paths in order to not get lost. Most of the morning I did well. However, as I grew tired, I lost focus and veered from the trail.
First blood.
In my defense, I came across this really fresh set of tracks. Of course, I had to follow them. The sucky thing was that they continued on to a neighboring property and
Someone out there
I had
needs
to
our
stop
help.
following them. When I looked up, I realized I was way off the trail and didn't know how to get back.
An ally has been
The
slain.
rest of the day was spent trying to find my way back to camp. About an hour before dark, I noticed a rundown house and cabin in the distance. By now, I wasn't sure whose property I was on.
A snowball
I hope
is
that
never just a snowball.
somebody was living
if you
there.
believe
They
in
could help me,
magic,
but as I got closer, I could tell the place had been abandoned for a good while. I knocked to make sure, but with no reply, I made myself at home. My first goal was to get a fire going. After I did that, I began calling through the cabinets for food and other things I thought would help me. Not much but a questionable can of chili and some candles were found. I heated up the chili over the fire and combined it with a half-eaten bag of
An
chips.
ally has been
After
slain.
dinner, I looked through the bedroom and discovered an old map of the area. I wasn't sure how accurate it would be after all that time, but I was happy to find it. I spread it out on the floor in front of the fireplace and planned my course for the morning. I was shocked to see that I had veered over 5 miles from where I'd started.
sometimes
I
the world's
must
more
have dozed
interesting
off.
when you close your eyes.
During the night,
I
I had
see
a super
goblins.
vivid dream that a
Whoa,
man was sitting
they
in a
have
chair
warts.
next to me and
That's how you know they're bad guys.
he never said a word. And when I jerked awake and saw that I was alone, I was relieved and quickly fell back asleep. The following morning, I woke up at 6:15 and got my stuff together. I made sure the fire was completely put out
An
and headed back
enemy
to
has
camp.
been slain.
I just stepped in the house when I came face to face with a strange man. The guy from my dream, in fact.
Let's get in there and
I was confused at
swap some
first,
stuff.
and when he spoke, I knew my dream had really happened. This man was holding an old Marlin 30-30. Not an odd sight for a hunter during deer season. This dude didn't look like a hunter, though. He wore an old, dirty backpack and normal, bright, dingy street clothes. His eyes had a very crazed look to them that made me uncomfortable to gaze
Fine.
at.
Magical too.
I was surprised, but regained my calm and
Ally
said,
has been slain.
"Good morning." Instead of saying it back, he just stared at me with those crazed black eyes. I began to say something, but he interrupted and asked what I was doing in the cabin.
The fairy's
Before I
house is
could
over
answer,
here.
he blurted
I
out that it
bet
was
that
his
drug
place.
swallowed her.
I continued and explained what had happened the day
Shut
before.
down.
The entire time I was telling him this, he was gripping the rifle so tightly his knuckles were beginning to turn white. His behavior was beginning to scare me. The only thing I wanted to do was get back to camp and then home.
Do your best.
The last word had barely left my lips before he angrily told me that it was his place.
That one.
It appeared to have been empty for quite a while, but I wasn't going to argue with him. I apologized as quickly as I could and went on my way. For a good 100 yards or more, I kept looking behind me. I was waiting to get shot in the back. Every time I looked back, he was staring maniacally back at me. Death
Everyone
gripping his
knows
gun.
heroes are brave, and they
It
hit
took a
stuff
couple of
really
hours to
hard.
find my way back,
Only
but
I know
by
the
then,
true secret.
I'd had plenty of time to dwell upon
No,
my encounter, and I was truly freaked out by that.
An ally has
It
been
actually hit
slain.
me. The guys that were still in camp were happy to see me and asked what had happened. I just said I got lost. I camped out for the night, never mentioning the nutcase that I met. I doubt that they
Don't be
take it
afraid,
seriously
Willem.
anyhow. The whole
I am
experience
not
had me so
scared.
scared I wanted nothing more than to get
Just a
home.
little.
The other guys must have thought I was crazy. After throwing all my stuff into the back of my truck, I tore off out of there and never returned. I knew I'd never be able to feel safe knowing that Pooh was somewhere in the woods, watching my party. That following Monday, my
Are we
friend
there
asked what
yet?
it caused me to leave so abruptly.
Get it?
I made up some lies.
You're laughing on the
My
inside,
wife
huh?
being sick. I'm not sure if he would believe me.
What a big beak you
Nothing
have.
much said about it again, and
You're gonna use it to
Maybe.
hurt people, aren't you?
just maybe, things are better.
We gotta find out what happens next, or I can never finish our song.
The story may be too fantastic
Can't be
to believe,
heroes
but
without a
I
song.
promise it happened. It was the last months of 1999, and my first marriage had just ended.
Secret hero.
When we began
handshake.
discussions, I agreed to let my
Yeah.
ex continue to live in our house with the kids. As a result, I was thrust onto the market for a new home. For the time being, I was crashing in an extended stay hotel, living on fast food. Finally, as that spring approached, I found a place I loved. The only disappointing part of the deal was that it had been uninhabited for going on 7
The only
years.
thing louder than Willem's
The
steps
woman that had
is a
lived there
story.
before had died, and her heirs had let it sit empty. It was eventually agreed upon to put it on the market, and that's when I came upon it. Despite the probable long list of repairs, the price was too good to pass up. The morning of March 3rd, I picked up the keys and signed the papers. The house was officially mine, and I got to work immediately to make it good again. I replaced a broken window and a few other things before I moved in 2 weeks later. I hadn't been there 2 days
You
before I
have been
received a
slain.
visit from a pair of detectives. They sat me down and told me the craziest thing I'd ever heard in my life. According to them, the nice little old lady who had lived there, Sharon, had an abusive husband named Walter. She claimed Walter left for the store one morning and never returned. And because of this history of abuse, she
My
didn't
mom's
report
out
his
there
disappearance.
somewhere.
The couple's only child,
hear her,
Linda,
Willem.
didn't either.
Every time I go to sleep.
Her mother had told her Walter had been having an affair with a woman from his job and had likely ran away to be with her. When Linda took her mother's story at face value, the woman bid Walter good riddance and moved on with their lives. Within a year, Sharon, now a free woman, began a relationship with her neighbor, Joseph Poole.
Heroes
She was
don't
granted
need hugs.
a divorce, and the couple were married not long
Hey,
after.
not looking now.
The pair lived out
You
their
big
lives in
first
house.
snargle.
Not everyone was so eager to believe Sharon's story, and the police were asked by Walter's sister to investigate his disappearance. And year after year, the truth always led back to Sharon, but the detectives on the case never had enough proof to arrest her.
An ally
Then,
has been
about
slain.
15 years after he went missing, a new pair of detectives were put on the trail.
So it's up to kids.
They went back to Walter's sister, now a very old woman, and asked if she had any idea how Sharon could have disposed of her brother's body. For the first time since the case began, she recalled an incident that took place not long after Walter's disappearance.
Shut
She was
down.
visiting Sharon, hoping to get information as to where her brother had
Double
moved to.
kill.
She happened to notice a large patch of the backyard where the ground had been tilled up and roses had been planted. This struck her as odd because it was still in the middle of winter and at least 4 months before planting season began. The bushes would surely die in the brutal Michigan winter. She asked Sharon about this, and she simply said she wanted to get ahead of things. The sister had no reason to disbelieve her at the time and
Home is that
accepted the
way,
story.
Willem.
For the first time in a long time, the police had a direction to follow. However, they were frustrated by the judge's denial of a search warrant, and the case soon ran out of steam, as it had so many times before. Life would proceed, and over the years, the case would be forgotten. That wasn't until a new police chief was hired and he launched an initiative to clear the city's open cases. 25 visitors were assigned the case. After a little research, they discovered Sharon and her new husband had died and the house had a new owner. The reason for their visit was to ask if I would allow them to dig up the yard to look for Walter's
An ally
remains.
has been slain.
I was naturally shocked by all I'd heard and needed time to think about it. After taking a few days to consider the request, I gave them the okay. The following morning, 20 or so cops, accompanied by a backhoe, began their search. Amongst say I was surprised by the sound, but after hearing their story, Walter's skeleton being discovered was almost expected. At the end of the day, everything seemed to work out for the best. The cops managed to close a 50-year-old mystery and Walter could be put away alongside his loved ones. The only downside was Walter's sister didn't live to see it. She deserved to be there for the funeral after all the time she had put into surgery. The situation had made me do a lot of thinking since it was brought to my attention. From all reports, old Walter was not good to his wife or respected their marriage. Maybe Sharon had a good reason to put an end to his nonsense. The problem I have with what she did is that by killing Walter and hiding his body away in the garden, his innocent sister, who had hurt no one, was left with a terrible notion that she and the rest of his family had been abandoned by him for a young piece of tail. Then, as time carried on, and she had come to terms with the strong possibility her brother was dead, she had nowhere to go to mourn him. And that, to me, my friends, just doesn't feel right. It was the empty house in my street that all the kids thought was haunted. I'm not sure how long it had been there, but I'm almost positive no one had lived there during my lifetime. The style in which it was made differed drastically from the other houses around it, so I think it might have been built far earlier than the others. The talk among the grown-ups was that it belonged to the guy who built the housing addition, and when he lost all of his money, he shot himself in the study. After his death, his estate got stuck in probate, so the house sat empty. I haven't found anything supporting the story, but it went a long way to reinforcing the haunted mansion idea. I spoke to an older kid who had been inside it before, and he claimed there were satanic stars painted everywhere. I now know that he was BSing me, but as a 7-year-old, that scared the life out of me. There was a big field between that house and the rest where we used to play. Once or twice, a kid would hit a ball into the yard and have to go get it. It was funny to watch them try to hop over the wrought iron fence and back as fast as they could. They almost always tripped coming back over. Then one day, it was my turn. And now, I wasn't laughing. A group of us kids had been playing football all afternoon. The team I was on had just scored a touchdown, and I was chosen to kick the field goal. We had this old metal structure that we used to kick through. It was stuck off in the corner of the field, and we had to drag it out to use it. The team set it up about 20 yards from the old house. It was obviously too close, but kids don't always think things through before they do them. The kid playing center hiked the ball to our QB, and I nailed it straight between the bars and went through one of the upstairs windows. I watched helplessly on as it happened, knowing I couldn't stop it. The second it came into contact with the glass, all the other kids took off. All except one. The kid who the ball belonged to. He just got it a few days before for a birthday present. He knew he was going to be in serious trouble if he didn't come home with it. He didn't have to say a word. Tears were already beginning to roll down his face. I suppose I could have told him to F off and left him to his doom, but that's not my nature. I assured him I would go get his ball back, but he had to go in with me. This made him far more scared. I'm sure inside his head he strongly considered leaving where it was, but he had no other choice. As he choked back his sobs, he nodded, and we made our way toward a certain death in our minds. We entered around the back to prevent being seen by nosy neighbors. I tried the knob and was surprised to see it open. Fortunately, the lace curtains were light enough for us to see our way around. The scary graffiti was nowhere to be seen. Actually, the inside almost looked untouched, a thin white sheet draped over the furnishings. Once I realized that it was nothing like I'd ever imagined, the old house lost much of its hold over me. My friend was younger, and it was obvious he was still terrified. I had begun looking around at all the old pictures, but I wanted to get out as quickly as possible. Several times he had to pull on my shirt to get me moving. The second floor was similar to the first, except for the terrible smell. All the rooms were open, but the one at the end of the hall. We looked through the others and came to a closed door. I opened the door. The smell got a lot worse. I wasn't concerned about where it was coming from at the moment. Both of us pulled our shirts over our faces and rushed in to search. I was rummaging through the sheets and a shrill scream came from behind me. I spun around and saw my friend with his hand over his mouth, pointing at a man laying on the floor. We both stood still and waited for him to
Let's
move.
make snowdrifts!
For a second, I thought we were in big trouble. However, the longer we stood there, it dawned on me. He was the source of the smell. It was because he was dead. I lost my cool after that and yelled out, "He's dead. Let's get out of here." My friend was hot on my heels. We didn't stop until we reached my house. When we caught our breath, I realized we'd left the ball behind. Neither of us wanted to go back in, so after a long time we gave up and went to my parents and told them what we had found. They were cool about it. First, they made sure we were okay, then they called 911. The two of us sat at my bedroom window and watched the police go in and out of the house. When the paramedics brought the man's body out, the police officer followed behind him with a football. He brought it over and talked to us for a while. We thanked him and he left. A couple of days later, there was a small paragraph in the paper talking about our morbid discovery. Us kids had been coming up with all kinds of horrible causes of death for the man. In the end, it turned out to be a run-of-the-mill drug overdose. Most of us quickly fell back into our normal lives and didn't talk about it unless it was brought up. My friend said his parents had asked him if he had anything to do with the thing in the paper. Perhaps wisely, he played dumb and just let it go. To their dying day, I don't think they knew how
Hurry,
close he
Willow.
came
Sounds like they're in
to
trouble.
losing that ball forever.
Slain. An enemy has been slain. Shut down.
I was on my postal route one morning when I got the idea. A small part of my route cuts through this old abandoned neighborhood. At the end of the cul-de-sac sits the decrepit two-story house. Something like you'd seen in an old horror movie. This is where I was going to do it. You see, I have this friend, Philip. We are part of a ghost hunting group in our spare time. It's a pastime I really enjoy and derive a lot of excitement from. Philip, however, is terrified of anything supernatural. Something as average as a cheesy ghost video on YouTube scares the life out of him.
Before we can save the world,
I'll never
first we
understand
gotta
why
see
he
it.
puts himself through one of our investigations. I asked him once why he did it, and he said it was a way to face his fears, something he'd heard about on TV. This put the kernel of an idea in my head. When I saw the house, it grew into a full-blown plan. I was going to pull a joke. When it was over, hopefully his fear of spooky things would be defeated. Anytime I can get a good laugh and help a friend at the same time seems like a win-win to me. I called him up that afternoon and told him we had a new house to investigate that Friday night. He sounded excited and I couldn't help but laugh and mention what I had in mind for him. I had 2 days to get what I needed and set everything up. I had stopped in during my route and looked for the best places to bring my equipment. There were signs of people, but from all I could see, they had not been around for a long time. Finally, Friday night came. After work, I parked my car a few streets over and walked to the house. I wasn't expecting Phil for another hour. I took this time to complete any last-minute tasks. I got done with 15 minutes to spare and crawled into my hiding place. Within minutes, I heard footsteps approaching outside. I bit my lip to stifle my giggling. I never felt so much like a child at that moment. Mere seconds after I heard the footsteps, my phone vibrated with a text message. It was Philip. He said he was held up by a train near his apartment and was running late. This was bad news. Phil lived almost 30 minutes away. I had to lay crunched up in a hidey hole even longer. Steps entered the house, echoing down the massive hallway. Wait a minute. This is when it hit me. If Philip was a half hour away, who was here? Voices of at least 2 men came bouncing down the hall toward me. One of them had noticed my equipment and sounded very angry. I heard loud bangs a few seconds later, and what I could assume was my stuff being smashed. The second man had a slight slur to his voice, and his words were far more aggressive. If I'm going to did this, Cut his head off and put it on a pole outside.
Rampage.
Maybe that'll keep people out. My heart began to beat like it was trying to break loose from my body. I wasn't sure what they were capable of and hoped they would leave without realizing I was still there. I did my best to not make any noise. I continued to listen and then heard something I dreaded. One of the men, the drummer phone, on my bed. I had stuck it in the hole under the stairs to hide it. Even then, I wasn't sure that they knew I was still there.
That's
So
up
the
as it
other men would get home and figure it out. They said if I made them look, they were going to let me saw it when they found me. All doubt was removed from that statement. I could hear them going from room to room, opening closets and doors. They were a few rooms away and I decided I needed to get out of there that second. When I heard them enter the room next to me, I made a break for it. I didn't dare look back, and within seconds, I could hear footfalls behind me. I pushed myself even harder, and it seemed to work. The closer I got to my car, the footfalls seemed to grow quieter. Still, even then, I didn't dare slow down. I ran around to the driver's side of the car and locked the door as fast as I could. This was the first look at the two pursuers. I was pleased to see them almost 100 yards behind me. They were gasping and fighting for every breath. I wasn't taking any chances, though. I started my car and tore out of there without looking back at the chair. I don't even remember if Philip was on his way. I made up some quick BS text and sent it to him. I did so just in time. I was 4 or 5 blocks from the house when we met each other across the intersection. He pulled up to me and I began spinning his arm while he was dressed. I almost believed it. He shrugged his shoulders and turned around and headed for home. I followed him for about a mile just to make sure and then turned off for my own place. To my knowledge, Phil still has no idea how close he was to being assaulted by a pair of angry squatters. The same likely applies to the fact that he was behind me. After my run-in with them, things got put into perspective. I realized the joke was a childish thing to do in the first place. I put stupid stuff like that behind me. I'm in no position to tell folks how to live their lives. If he wants to live in fear, that's his choice. God knows there's plenty of things out there to be afraid of.
Fear's a rat spell summoner. It's not a flute.
No one knew where it came from. We all went to sleep the night before and it was there the next morning. Not even the owners of the house on both sides had a clue how it got there. Neither homeowner ever heard as much as the hiss of air brakes during the cold of that night. The only real indication of how it had arrived was the trailer it was sitting upon. I was still relatively young at the time, around 13, but the subject was a hot topic around the neighborhood and every person I spoke to, whether a kid or an adult, was eager to talk about it. Our neighborhood was somewhat new and off by itself, and it wasn't out of the ordinary for folks to dump things out there. Dogs and cats were the most common, but 1 or 2 cars would turn up every year. The house, though, no one had seen that, or expected it. The days passed with no information could be gotten from anywhere. Soon it began to take on a spooky and haunted reputation. Along with its phantom-like arrival in the dark of the night, it is a little similar to that house from Psycho. The stories first reached me while I was talking to a friend's younger brother. Among the grade school kids, the house was becoming a very real symbol of fear, although it was just an old, empty house to me. This fear didn't prevent some of the more adventurous from entering and exploring. I witnessed a particularly funny episode just by chance. While loafing aimlessly around the streets, I was passing by in time to see a preteen boy running from the house in terror, claiming that something had grabbed him. Whether his imagination had gotten the best of him or an older kid was having a bit of fun, the horror put upon this abandoned house had fully taken root in the neighborhood. While this was going on, a real boogeyman had been forgotten about. I'll not put his actual name here, not for privacy, but that of his victims. I'll call him Rudy. Rudy had grown up in the neighborhood, and until he was arrested, was well liked, but a lot of the parents had voiced their fears early on because of his habit of hanging around with the boys. When he was released from jail, he was allowed to move in with his folks. Anyone who wasn't aware of his proclivities beforehand knew now. Every parent in the neighborhood watched him closely, but when the ghost house popped up, people's focus shifted. A few of us teenagers were riding our bikes around the neighborhood. The father of a boy we'll call Bill was looking for a sign. I overheard him speaking to a young kid close by, asking if he had seen him. Nonchalantly, the kid said that he had seen Bill going into that ghost house with Ruby just a few minutes prior. This got my full attention. The shock of the father's face is still crystal clear in my mind. I turned around and watched the father run full speed into the house. Most of us there stood transfixed as we saw Bill's dad disappear inside. Things were quiet for about the first 30 seconds, then all of a sudden, a loud ruckus broke out, followed by Rudy flying out of the doorway and onto the ground below. Bill's dad was close behind. He leapt onto Rudy, throwing fists as he landed. Bill came out a few seconds later crying for his dad to stop. His dad ignored him, standing up and kicking Rudy to the ground over and over. Rudy eventually got to his feet and ran for home. Bill and his dad were right behind him. I continued to watch until they disappeared from my sight. Bill and Rudy would both claim later on that nothing had happened between them. Either way, Bill's dad had the support of most of the community, and Rudy declined to press charges on him. Rudy would eventually move away and out of the minds of most of us until he was arrested 3 years later for abducting and killing 2 boys near his new home. Only then did we realize how lucky Bill had been. That night, as I'd fallen asleep, I remembered wondering what was going to happen to Rudy if he goes down. When I woke up, things were normal for a summer morning. Around 9, I was making a bowl of cereal when I got a phone call. It was a friend of mine, and he was short of breath and excited. It's gone, man. I hung up and hopped on the phone. When I arrived at the end of the street, I looked down and saw the empty lot as it used to be. I rode down to it, and a small group were gathered talking to the neighbors. It was much the same as the morning when it appeared. They hadn't heard or seen anything strange. It seemed to leave just as silently as it had arrived. To this day, I haven't met a soul who knows anything about that house. Sometimes I think I dreamt the whole thing up. But then I speak to an old friend from the neighborhood and my memories are confirmed. Of course, I don't believe it was haunted or anything like that, but I know for sure that something was wrong about it, and I pray that I never see it again. I was too young to remember what the house originally looked like. My mom showed me pictures taken with the old couple standing out in front of it a few times. The husband passed away in early 1995 with no one left around to help her day to day. His wife, sadly, had to go off to a nursing home. By most accounts, they were a much-loved part of the neighborhood. With their loss, there seemed to come a rapid decline in its fortunes. The sell-offs were gradual at first. Before anyone caught on, almost 20% of the homeowners had moved on to greener pastures. Not all of those owners sold outright. A small group decided to hold on to their properties and rent or lease them out. This unfortunately began to attract tenants of a much lower income level. In a matter of a few short years, the neighborhood had sunk so low, only a handful of those original families from 30 years before were still around. Those that replaced them rarely stayed longer than 6 months at a time, and the damage they managed to do in that period was often things that couldn't be fixed with a little drywall and sod patches. I think it was around 13 or so when I began to notice how bad things were. It wasn't out of the ordinary to see open deals, and shootings had become a commonplace. The last few remaining original families were far from happy with the way things had turned out, but there wasn't much they could do. Most of them were older couples previously unfamiliar with any form of crime. Once the drug dealers moved into the old couple's house, the remaining law-abiding citizens feared for their futures. After the couple's deaths, the house was left to one of their children. They had rented it out for the first few years, but when the tenants destroyed it one too many times, they sold it off to a young family. The new owners took the time to renovate the house, only to put it back on the market within the year. They were good people and were prepared for the dangers ahead of them. The current homeowners are a largely properly invested company. They managed to rent it out once or twice, but at the time the dealers began squatting, it had been empty for over 2 years. Although most of the old families had moved on, there were still enough left to be angered by the dealers' actions. That old couple had been loved so much the very idea of drugs being dealt out of their home was sacrilegious. It was bad enough the neighborhood had been turned into an open-air drug market, but turning a house, especially that one, into a crack den was a step too far. At first, a few of the men on the street asked the gang to move somewhere else. Their pleas would fall on deaf ears and be answered with curse words and certain finger gestures. They would try calling the police, but by the time officers arrived, no one would be present. This strategy wouldn't do anything other than anger the squatters. They got their revenge one night when they caught Mr. Murphy, my friend's dad, with his guard down. He had gone out to put a letter in his mailbox and the dealers pounced on him. It was initially just a beatdown, but when he tried to fight back, he was pistol whipped almost to death. This ended up being the final straw. The gang wouldn't see what was coming, and after it was all over, they would cease to ever be a problem again. Me and my friends began to notice our parents acting extra strange, sneaking off to talk and going mum the second we approached them. Things went down a few weeks later. Early one morning at around 4 a.m., I was awakened by sirens and lights from across the street. When I rushed to the window, I got there just in time to see the roof of the dope house collapsing in flames. The fire department did their best, but the house was completely consumed by the time they arrived. I noticed my folks were already out front watching, which seemed odd. I joined them and the rest of the neighborhood on our lawns to take in the festivities. I don't remember there being a single person upset to see the house go. After the attack on Mr. Murphy, the house went from being a beautiful symbol of a greater time to a den for dangerous animals. The fire had burned itself out by dawn. That was when they began to bring out the bodies. 6 in total lost their lives in the fire. The smiles on many of the men's faces struck me as a little cold, but with all the trouble they'd had, I couldn't blame them for being a bit happy. I was still shocked to see what came next. The arson investigation began within days. The suspicion among most of us was that it was electrical or the result of a lit cigarette. It eventually turned out to be a blatant arson. The evidence showed several trails of accelerant around the outside of the house. A few investigators traveled around the neighborhood asking each owner if they had seen anything suspicious. No one had, or so they claimed. One incident still sticks with me today. I overheard my parents speaking to the investigator. My father mentioned more than one attack upon the house by an opposing gang. The problem is, I don't recall the gang ever having trouble with anyone but the neighbors. I have since come to form my own opinions on the fire's cause. By the end of this month, the case was closed and ruled an arson attack from a competing drug gang. A demolition company came along right before Christmas and leveled the remaining structure. That was in 2017, and the lot has been empty since then. The neighborhood, while not as good as it supposedly once was, is a happier place without the dealers. While the drug trade continues in the surrounding area, our neighborhood has remained rather quiet. As I grow older and think on starting my own family, I am of the opinion that the fire could be seen as a sign of better things to come. Maybe the way it was done shouldn't be so important. Events from the story took place during the summer of my sophomore or junior year of college. I remember that I had just celebrated my birthday and was getting ready to head back to campus in the next week or so. For a little background, each year, ever since I was little, my family would spend 10 days at the state fair. We lived on a farm and would bring some of our animals with us to stay in the buildings that fairgoers could walk through during their trips to the fairgrounds. We would bring our RV camper and would often rotate who would stay in the RV and who would stay in the buildings with the animals. Most of the time, everyone returned to the RV to sleep, as it wasn't the most comfortable night's sleep staying in a chair next to the animal stall all night. I have so many good memories from my time spent at the fair. I met some of my closest friends there, and it turned into almost like a family reunion that I would look forward to every year. The adults would stay with the animals during the day, and the kids could walk around the fair and have fun. At night, we would all get together and have dinner and enjoy lots of laughs and stories around the RVs. With all that said, I have one memory from my time spent at the fair that comes across my mind far more frequently than the positive ones. The fair was going to be ending in a few days, and I will be heading back to school as previously mentioned. My friend Casey and I were having a few drinks with our parents, and were getting pretty tired, probably from all the wine slushies we had during the day. We started to head back to my parents' RV to lay down and relax for the night. The walk wasn't very long, and we were back at the RV in 5 minutes or so. Casey and I talked a little bit about school and what we were excited to go back to and what we were anxious about for the coming year. The next thing I remember was waking up thinking I heard a scratch or a scratching sound against the RV. Casey was snoring pretty loudly, so I figured that maybe that was what woke me up. I closed my eyes trying to go back to sleep, and as I started dozing off, I heard something again. This time it sounded like a whisper or very quiet mumbling. My eyes shot open, wondering if it was our parents coming back or if I was just hearing things. The windows of the camper weren't typically open, but I usually asked my dad to open them during the day in case it got extremely hot. I quieted my breathing to try and focus on what was being said outside. After a few moments of intense listening, I heard someone right outside the window whispering, "He sees you. He sees all of you." And then just repeating, "His eyes are open," over and over, mixing in something slightly different every few seconds. The voice was wispy, like it was being done to mimic a snake or whisper in a louder fashion. I immediately lowered the brightness on my phone and texted my dad to come back right away. He arrived, slightly intoxicated, a few minutes later to ask what was wrong. I told him what had happened, and he said it was probably just a bad dream or something. Casey seemed unaffected as well and went back to her camper to sleep for the rest of the night. I couldn't sleep at all for the rest of the night and made my dad close the windows to make me a little more comfortable. The next morning I got up early due to the lack of sleep and was going to head over to the cows to give them some food and set up there for the day. The day was pretty uneventful, and the memory from the previous night actually started to fade, and I was able to relax for a little while. As the sunset started setting in, I got a little more anxious and hoped that I wouldn't experience anything out of the ordinary for the remainder of the evening. I decided to make it an early night, as the next morning we would pack everything up and get ready to leave and head home. I didn't feel very tired once I got back to the camper, but quickly felt my eyes getting heavy as I strolled through Reddit on my phone. Similar to the previous night, I was awoken by a sound coming from outside. It sounded like something had bounced off one of the windows. Honestly, it sounded like a bird flew directly into the RV. Fortunately, my dad seemed to hear it as well and said that if he heard anything else, he would go outside and see what was going on. About 15 minutes later, we heard the same noise, and my dad threw his sweatshirt on and went outside. Me, both terrified and wanting to know what was going on, followed him to the doorway. He didn't leave the RV. Once my dad got outside, he immediately stopped in his tracks.
Okay.
There was a man standing directly next to our camper. He had a hood over his head and had the most yellow, crooked smile I'd ever seen. That disturbing mix of yellow teeth and a demented grin will forever be burned into my brain. As soon as my dad realized I was in the doorway, he yelled for me to go back in and close the door. I did what he said, and about 2 minutes later, my dad said that he was calling the police as the guy began to ran off. He wasn't only contacting the police because someone was seemingly trespassing at the fair, but we also had damage to our RV. It had paint on it. Red paint with an eyeball drawn and something written in the same red paint. "He's here. He's watching," is what it said. There was also deep scratches on the backside of the RV that looked a little too deep to have been done with keys. During the commotion, most people were up and outside, and we discovered that 5 other campers had similar writing on them. They were spaced out in the parking area and were seemingly done at random. We decided to pack up and leave first thing the next morning after filing a report for the damages done to the RV. We hadn't really discussed as a family since it happened, and the only time I have been to the state fair since then was to meet up with a friend for a few drinks. Whenever this memory pops back into my head, I feel a sense of anxiety and hope that nothing this creepy happens to me again. I was never a big fan of the fair. It was always overcrowded, hot, and not really my cup of tea. However, I would still go to the New York State Fair each year to get a slice of Sicilian pizza from my favorite pizza stand. Only got the slice once a year at the fair, and to visit my dad who would work the fair. My dad always took 2 weeks vacation from his real job to work at the fair each year. Yeah, weird, I know. This story revolves around the last time I attended the NYS fair. I was there on a Thursday night with 4 to 5 friends, and we decided to do a few rides and do some of the smaller attractions. We started with the House of Horrors that advertised the world's largest rat. Clearly just another animal that they were advertising as a rat. I honestly don't understand what else was in there. Maybe the snake lady and some fake body parts in jars. Anyways, next we decided to go into the fun house. The lady that took our tickets seemed to be way too into her job at the attraction. She was dressed the part and sure gave off the creepy vibe you would expect for a fun house. She had a long black cloak with a large hood attached, and her facial features reminded me of a witch even though she wasn't wearing any prosthetics. We moved through the house pretty fast, but got a little caught up inside the mirror maze. We got separated slightly, but I was staying pretty close to Alex, so I wouldn't be separated from the group entirely. As we were maneuvering our way around the maze, I could have sworn that I saw the lady from the start of the funhouse behind the nose. I pointed it out to Alex, and she thought I was just trying to scare her and laughed it off. We eventually made our way to the exit and decided we wanted to go to the haunted house ride next. As we were leaving the funhouse, the same lady that was at the entrance was at the exit. She stared at all of us as we left and didn't say a word. She had a scowl on her face like we had done something to make her mad. After she saw me, her expression changed to a wide grin. She slightly reached out for my arm and said, "Your aroma is intoxicating." Thoroughly freaked out and borderline angry that some random person was grabbing my arm, I just pulled away and asked my friends if they saw that. They all joked that she probably had a crush on me and said that I should go back and get her number. After a decent wait, we made it onto the haunted house ride. I asked Alex if she would sit with me, and she obliged. The house was full of animatronic jump scares that probably wouldn't even scare elementary school kids. However, I always did enjoy these types of rides as they reminded me of the Haunted Mansion at Disney. About halfway through the ride, our car kind of started going backward and forward and eventually came to a complete stop. There was an announcement that the ride was malfunctioning, and that when the bar was raised, we should safely exit the vehicle and slowly and safely make our way towards the exit. We got out of the car and started to make our way towards the exit. The animatronic figures were no longer moving or popping out, so I took time to walk up to a few of them to see what they looked like up close. They were mostly what I expected: dirty, dingy, and odd-looking. About 50 to 60 feet ahead, there was a black cloaked figure. I told Alex I wanted to see if the figure was attached to a pole and would shoot out and expose a creepy face under the hood. When I ran up to the hooded figure, I got real close to see if I could move the hood to see what was underneath. To my absolute shock and horror, there was a person underneath the hood, just standing there. Even worse, it was the same hooded woman from the funhouse. She pushed her hood back slightly and said, "I followed you. I followed the scent." Wondering if I should run or call this person out, I went to the ladder and asked her, "What's it following?" In a stern tone, she just stared at me and didn't respond. Alex then caught up to me and realized what was going on and tried to pull me away to the exit. The woman then grabbed my arm for the second time this time sinking her nails into my skin. As I pulled away, I could feel that her hand was still dug in. By the time I exited, looked at my
An
arm,
ally has been slain.
small slits of skin missing and blood beginning to pool where the skin used to be. My friends were now extremely scared and upset, frantically looking around for someone to help us. I asked them to stop and to just find me a bathroom so I could wash off my arm with some soap and water. I didn't go to the police office at the fair or make any formal report. I honestly just went to move on and not think about that cycle that followed me around for about half that night. And I still think back on this
An
and wonder
ally
if
has been
that was the right
slain.
choice. Should I have documented some type of formal complaint? I mean, it did seem like she worked at the attractions, and could she possibly have repeated this behavior to someone else? I still tend to think about this event, especially as we approach the summer months. I decided to write about it now, as NYS just announced that the fair would be closed this year for the first time ever. So to the creepy, stalker, scratching witch lady, I'm thankful I won't have to see you again.
An enemy has been slain.
I want to preface this story with the old saying that you can never really judge a book from its cover. I still haven't fully recovered from the events that took place on this late summer evening several years ago. As time goes on, the mental scars fade away, but it's an experience that I will live with for the rest of my
An
life.
enemy has been slain.
During the events of the story, I lived in a fairly large farmhouse in the middle of nowhere. It was an area with little to no traffic or commuters. The days until the last 2 weeks of summer. Every year, my town is the host for the annual fair. To be more specific, the location is just down the road from my farmhouse. I don't usually mind because I'm up late most nights and I never really had any negative experiences in regards to people visiting the fair. During this 2-week period, it's a lot of loud music, traffic, either by car or some local foot traffic, fireworks, and lights from the fairgrounds. Most nights I usually just sit outside listening to music and watch the people walk to and from their cars that are parked in a lot a couple of hundred yards or so from the property. Typical of most fairs, parking fills fast and people essentially try to park in restricted areas that are close to my house or my neighbor's properties. Unfortunately, it is not uncommon every few years to have a drunk patron or two stumble towards my property. They're almost always harmless and end up walking down the street just a few minutes later. As a result of our small town and proximity to the fair from my home, I have a very good relationship with the sheriff. We've become pretty good friends over the years, and his department does an excellent job of keeping everything safe and orderly for the residents who live near the fairgrounds. I've only had to call him maybe once or twice over the years, and it wasn't for anything serious, basically just loitering. Fast forward to the night of the story, and he was sitting outside and watching the fireworks and people leave the fair. The fair closed around 10 p.m. and the fireworks were wrapping up. You could see people leaving to get to their cars to try and beat the traffic. I was getting ready to go inside for the night when I saw a group of people walking towards my house. They were probably in their 20s, I would guess, and just seemed loud and intoxicated, which certainly wasn't uncommon. The group of people caused no issue and eventually made their way in the right direction and headed to where I assumed their vehicle was parked. Just as I was about to walk inside, at a little bit of a distance, maybe 30 to 40 feet or so, was another woman standing. She seemed very still, just staring from a distance in the dark. She was wearing a bright pink dress and had long hair about the shoulder length. She broke out of a pause and started moving closer to my property. She eventually got parallel to my front door. She stopped in the middle of the road and turned her entire body to face my house. I was in the house at this time with the lights off, so I crept to one of the windows and stood and stared back for a moment to see if she was going to move on. After about 30 seconds, she turned back to the road and kept walking. It was a little weird, as no one ever really gets that close to my house, but nothing of great concern. I brushed it off as another person who maybe had too much to drink. I got ready for bed and went upstairs to my bedroom to pass out for the night. My bedroom overlooked the front of the house, and I could see the road, and just as I was going to lay down, on my bedroom window, I saw the girl in pink, standing in the middle of the road, facing my home. for the second time. This is where the anxiety started to kick in,
An
and I
ally
began
has been
wondering if the
slain.
person was lost, and maybe got separated from the group. I jumped over to my dresser and called the sheriff to see if they had someone nearby, leaving the fair to check and see if this person was alright or needed any help. He didn't answer. Luckily, I had his personal cell, so I sent him a text message, just letting him know what was going on. If I didn't hear back in a few minutes, I figured I would just go outside and ask if she was okay. When I looked back out the window, she was gone out of sight. No sooner after I looked out the window, I heard a loud bang
An enemy
downstairs.
has been slain.
I jumped from my bedside to the top of the staircase and saw that my front door was open, with nothing but the moonlight shining in. This was weird because I thought I had locked the door. I always lock the door, just a habit. I started to get really concerned and then froze with fear when I heard giggles and the light footprints of running your toes when I pulled down the stairs. I couldn't believe someone could actually be in the house. Was I hearing things due to the recent adrenaline rush? I tried to sneak down the stairs quietly to make a run for the door, and as I got to the bottom step, I heard in a loud and unnerving voice, "Hey, where do you think you're going?" I turned and got a quick glimpse. It was the girl in pink. She was standing, slightly hunched over, with both hands behind her back. She had a blank stare on her face, but I could hear a low giggle barely audible through her teeth. Still not sure how someone can giggle with that look on their face. I turned immediately and ran to the front door. To my shock and horror, she was right behind me, following me with one arm waving frantically, and the other still concealed behind her back. "I'm coming for you," she said with an insidious and terrifying voice. I ran several yards down the road with her right on my tail, trying to gain some distance. Thankfully,
An
by
ally
some
has
stroke
been
of luck, a
slain.
patrol car was moving slowly down the road. This didn't seem to faze this girl at all. We both kept running. The officer got out of the car and tackled the woman to the ground. I'm not sure if it was because I was screaming for help, or if the officer had received a message from the sheriff where they asked for someone to come check out the person who was wandering around the property. My sheriff buddy ended up on the scene shortly thereafter and shared some of the details with me. The young woman could not remember her name and said she had no idea who she was. She did, however, keep telling the cops that she lived at my house and that I was the one that broke into her home. One of the most terrifying aspects of the story is that, still to this day, the woman has no confirmed identity. She had no idea when I found her. She didn't know her name, her age, where she was from. All she claimed was that she lived in my house. And from what I understand, she was detained and given further psychiatric evaluation. It scares the bejeebus out of me that there was no real motive or backstory to this intruder. I think I'm still missing a little bit of closure as to the why. She wasn't drunk. Why did she choose my house? Anyway, if I can say one thing from this experience, then always be on the guard and make sure you protect yourself first and foremost, because you never know where danger can be lurking. Last year was the very first and last time I ever gone on a blind date. At the time of this story, I had recently got out of a fairly long-term relationship. I'm just starting to get out there and meet some new people. Meeting new people has always been difficult for me, as I'm on the shy side and really don't like putting myself out
An
there.
enemy has been
I was set
slain.
up with a man named John from a coworker, and that is John, not the J-O-H. He made that very clear from the start. We exchanged numbers through our mutual friend and started to text each other. At first, things seemed to go very well. He seemed normal, but again, we hadn't met and hadn't really had many in-depth conversations. After about a week of texting, we decided to go on a date to our local fair. People from all over the state drive and even stay at the fair. It's a pretty big gathering with thousands of people attending every year. I figured that if this guy is a lunatic, at least I can run and scream and there will be tons of people to get away from.
He has
I think
destroyed
everyone
the
who
turret.
is someone usually does so
Turret
in a
plating
public setting,
will
right?
soon fall.
The day
Shut
finally
down.
came, and he surprisingly looked exactly like his
Killing
pictures that I
spree.
stalked on social media. He'd be on the taller side, definitely over 6 feet, muscular build, dark black hair with black eyes. The night started out fine, other than a few weird topics he brought up in conversation, but I really didn't care too much because I was socially awkward and usually couldn't find much to say when meeting new people. We got food together and I paid for my portion, which I don't mind because I am an independent person. Around 9:30 p.m., it was almost completely dark. He asked me if I wanted to ride the giant Ferris wheel. It actually sounded nice, and I was looking forward to it. I thought, hey, it could be kind of romantic for a first date. This was one of those huge Ferris wheels that overlooked the entire fairgrounds, and being that it was dark, you could see all the lights from up above. We got in line. It was a pretty long wait, but he talked almost the entire time, which was fine with me because it made me seem less awkward as I just listened and got to know him a little better. The only thing that seemed a little off was that he kept exchanging this weird glance with the couple behind us in line. After doing this several times, it was more than a coincidence, so I asked him if everything was okay. He leaned down to me and basically told me that he thought he may recognize the guy but wasn't too sure, but should probably avoid starting a thing. It seemed like a legit story, so I really didn't pay any more attention to the couple.
Killing spree.
Until we're about to board the
An
Ferris wheel.
enemy has been slain.
As we got into the small shuttle, John sat next to me, and the attendant let the other couple on with us. I thought that was kind of weird, and maybe you had to go in groups of 4 due to the long line. We started our ascension up the wheel, and for the first time all night, John was quiet. He was actually just staring down his feet. But the worst part was the couple sitting across from us. They just sat there quietly staring daggers at me. I tried making conversation with John, but he just kind of shrugged me off and stared off the side of the shuttle. We finally made it to the top of the ride and we stopped briefly up there. My first emotion was fire of the beautiful view, but when I turned back around to John, and that feeling of excitement turned quickly to fear. John was staring at me with a half-open smile, and his dark eyes looking down at me. I looked across from me and the couple was doing the same thing. John started singing a strange song that I didn't recognize, and the couple joined in with it. They just kept singing the same line over and over. Come to get you, come to get you. The most haunting melody I could ever imagine. Now I realize this may sound more weird than scary, but imagine yourself being stuck in the sky with 2 people you don't know, all of them staring at you and singing this weird song. I was not having any of this at all, so I did the only thing I could think of doing, and that was scream. Well, this was a mistake because the 3 other passengers decided to scream alongside of me and follow the screaming with laughter. So everyone around me probably figured we were goofing off at the top of the ride. Genuine panic ensued. I kept trying to just get some words out, but it was so uneasy. I couldn't speak. Finally, I had a great idea to try and call one of my friends from the top of the Ferris wheel, and as I pulled out my phone, John snatched it right from my hands. Finally, I formed a complete sentence and said in a terrified voice, "What are you doing?"
Your team has destroyed a turret.
He laughed and responded in a sinister voice, "I'm just getting you ready for when he shows up." This strange and eloquent sentence was followed by cheering and laughter from the couple across from me. I tried yelling to the ground, but there was so much noise from the fair music that my voice was being completely drowned out. Again, in unison with the group started to say, almost a chant, "He's coming to get you. He's coming to get you. Do not be afraid, for he is coming to get you."
You have slain
I started to
an
cry
enemy.
and freak out. After only a few minutes, which seemed like forever, the ride started up again, and we made our descent to the bottom of the wheel. Once we got several feet from the bottom of the ride, paused again, but I didn't care. I jumped on the shuttle and was greeted with loads of gasps from the people still in line. Instead of shouting for help, I just ran up. It is easy to say what you would do in a situation like that, but my brain was saying just get out of there and run. Ran all the way to the main entrance and alerted an officer at the door as to what had just happened. He didn't allow me to use a phone to call a friend to come pick me up. Thankfully, she was there in just minutes, and I ran to her car. As I got into the car, I saw John, alongside a couple sitting on a bench near the main entrance. And even more terrifying was that they were with another person, a very tall figure dressed in dark brown holding a cane. All I kept thinking about was what they kept saying on the ride about "he is coming." Was this the man that they were referring to this entire time? I got home and reported that he stole my phone and gave the cop all of John's information. But John seemed to vanish after that night. The number from his phone was deactivated. My phone was returned after it was found to be lost in the crowd of the fair. My friend who introduced us said that he too lost all contact. It was as if this John fell off the face of the earth. My friend apologized up and down for weeks that he had set me up with John, so they had that experience. He even started to question whether this was just all some sort of elaborate YouTube thing. I honestly, in so many ways, kind of hoped that it was, even if it is wildly sadistic. It took months for me to get out there again and try and go on another date. And unfortunately, this has given me a fear of getting to know new people. Something like this could happen again.
An ally has been slain.
I've heard and read a lot of horror stories on the internet, and I've always been quick to dismiss them as fake or fabricated. However, after the experience that I had, which I'm currently putting into writing, I can attest that when you hear these stories and you feel like they can never happen to you, and that the experiences are somewhat displaced from reality, they really do happen, and they do have lasting impacts on people's lives. My experience was easily the most horrifying and disturbing experience of my life. All the names in the story have been changed to keep identities and locations confidential. The night in question started like any other typical late summer evening. My hometown holds a pretty big fair to cap the end of the summertime festivities, and this year was no different. I attended the fair with my two best friends, Kevin and Jeff. Once arriving at the fairgrounds, we decided to meet up with my girlfriend Jamie and her two friends Amanda and Jill. We were having a blast eating food, checking out the local items for sale at the tents, listening to music, and walking around just taking in the environment. For those of you that attend your local fairs, you know that something about them brings out some unique people. And shortly after arriving, we bumped into a particular patron who was very unique. He was a middle-aged man, dressed like a clown. His dirty and rugged clothes almost made him look homeless, but we just figured it was part of the clown getup. This peculiar-looking man had a red rubber nose and a clown whip, shoes the size of a small boat. As we were walking, he came from behind us and grabbed my friend Kevin and asked for some spare change. It was harmless, honestly, but this startled our group as we didn't see him approaching. I think we gave him $5 to $10 and wished him a good evening and continued walking in the direction we were going. After creating a nice distance away from the clown, we decided to take a break from walking and grab a drink as it was pretty hot. This was when I noticed a man in the distance. He was wearing a red mask, black hooded sweatshirt, jeans and work boots, and was carrying what appeared to be an axe or hatchet. It is important to note that at this point, we were on the midway of the fair, which contained tons of rides and games as far as you could see. The reason why this man briefly paused, I was a little concerned because there were fun houses and haunted house exhibits all over this section of the fair. A few minutes later, we decided to do some rides so each one of us could break off into pairs. That's when I noticed the masked man again. We were on one of those old-fashioned wooden roller coasters when I noticed the man was standing behind the attraction. As soon as the ride ended, I kind of made a dash towards the exit of the ride. Kevin and Jeff were kind of annoyed and finally yelled for me to stop. Several yards away from the roller coaster, I told the group about the masked man. I wanted to tell some fair security, just to see if this man was in fact part of the fair, or a crazy person walking around with a weapon. The group laughed and told me to calm down. They pointed to one of the haunted houses, and there was a zombie standing outside scaring people in mine. A few exhibits down was a fun house where a killer clown was messing around with guests. They told me to relax and that the Axeman was just part of the fair. I agreed and went back to trying to have a good time with everyone. Toward the end of the night, we were getting ready to leave and head back to Jamie's house for some night swimming when Jeff wanted to get some ice cream. We agreed to stop on the way out while Kevin, Jeff, Amanda, and Jill waited in line. Me and Jamie set off to the side and just people watched until Jamie's face turned ghost white. Once I noticed her expression change, I turned to notice the Axeman standing in the distance. I decided no more games and I ran after the man full speed ahead. I chased him through one of the animal tents, but due to the large amount of people, I lost him. I figured since he ran away that he must just be someone who worked for the fair and a couple of hours later, we were at Jamie's sitting around a fire. It was just the six of us enjoying some conversation and laughs. Our bliss suddenly turned to panic when we heard shuffling in the forest that sits behind Jamie's house. We stopped talking and stared into the thick, dark trees. All we could hear was the crackling of the fire and the stillness of the night as we stared into the dark void. Then, out of the darkness, was the Axeman, and his red mask appeared. He ran full speed out of the trees with the same axe in hand. The expressionless red mask and the way his head was tilted was an image I never be able to get out of my head. This can't be real, is all I could think of as the six of us sprinted away from the fire. Jamie's house was too far away, so we ran to the pool house, which is a small little room filled with all pool tools and chlorine. And like every horror story cliche out there, Jamie truly lived in the middle of nowhere. Andy's cell phone was back inside with my clothes. I arrived at the pool house first and opened the door. I just about pushed everyone in and made my way in last, and as I tried to shut the door, the man threw down his axe and sliced the top of my arm. Grimacing in pain, listening to screaming behind me as I was able to grab the door and shut it and lock it. The man beat on the door either with his hand or the handle of the axe. We screamed and cried, and by some stroke of luck, Jamie had a landline phone in the small little pool house and dialed 911. The Axeman must have heard the conversation because he immediately stopped trying to break down the door. We peered out the window and noticed the figure facing the door but not moving. His black eyes staring out of the red mask, holding the axe with both hands. He then lifted the axe and threw it at the door. After just a couple of seconds, he removed the mask, and this was when I realized that he was not a he at all, but a woman. She had makeup running down her face as if she were crying all night long. She fell to her knees and began to scream and cry. The emotions we all felt at this moment were almost indescribable. This is when I noticed Jeff looked like he was about to be sick. The woman with the axe was his ex-girlfriend in college that none of us had ever met. He was in shock and clearly at a complete loss for words. No sooner after this revelation did the cops show up and promptly arrested her. We all gave our statements and went our separate ways, me directly to the hospital. Thankfully, I only had to have about 15 stitches, but it could have been much, much worse had it reached the bone. Jamie stayed with me that night just to make sure that we were going to be okay. Now, I know writing this story does sound ludicrous and it might be a stretch for some of you to believe, but I know the fear that I felt and the raw emotions that will impact my life forever. Everyone be careful out there, and always be aware of your surroundings constantly. And also, be aware of people's histories and the things that might come back to haunt you. So this story is a bit unsettling and weird, a little different than stories that are usually posted here. The events of this night I didn't really consider scary until years later when I really reflected on what truly happened. I'm 30 years old now, but was only 15 during the events of the story. The evening started fairly normal. A bunch of my friends and I just wanted to hang out. We came to a pool because we were at the state fair without any adults. It was a group of about 10 of us, if I remember correctly. We decided to post up toward the back of the fairgrounds where all the rides were. We were all just talking and telling jokes and trying to impress the girls that would occasionally walk by. During our time hanging out in the back, we were approached by a very strange-looking person. He was an average height, a little thick and belly, just like a beer belly, bald but was sporting some hair on the sides. He approached us with great confidence and said in a stern voice, "You guys waiting for the ship as well?" Thinking this was more comical than scary, we kind of just laughed and responded with, "The ship? What are you talking about?" The man smiled and flashed his chipped teeth, and again, in his confident voice said, "Yeah, the ship from space. You guys here to board as well?" Being kids, we just thought this was a joke. We laughed hysterically and just thought that this guy had a lot to drink or something along those lines. After we had finished basically laughing in this guy's face, I finally responded to him saying, "Where's this ship going?" He responded confidently, "The Andromeda Galaxy, of course."
An
This is the
enemy
last
has
straw
been
for us.
slain.
We were just about hunched over in pain as we were laughing so hard. Well, the man finally realized we were laughing at him, and he changed his tone real quick. The confidence in his voice became faint, and the man said,
An ally has been slain.
"When they come, you'll see." He responded by basically saying whatever and then stepping away from this crazy guy. At this point, he started to follow us and was now irate, chasing us and was yelling about the aliens. Finally, after a few minutes of this and lots of stares from the before the fair, I turned around and said in my blunt 15-year-old voice, "Dude, leave us alone. We don't want any part of your ship or aliens, man." Still treating this a joke, but more annoyed and creeped out than anything else, we just kept walking. The man finally yelled, "Stop." We all turned and looked at the creepy UFO man, and he said, almost in tears now, "I've seen you in my dreams. You've been on the ship with
Shut
me,
down.
and they chose us."
An ally
Officially
has
creeped
been
out, I
slain.
pushed the guy away. He surprisingly went backwards quickly like he weighed nothing. After that, he just started laughing. And with all the commotion, we noticed many fairgoers forming a circle around us to make sure there wasn't an issue escalating. The crazy man started pacing around the circle of people that formed, and started to ask everyone in almost a desperate voice now, "Are anything going up? They'll be here soon. We need to get ready." That was met with tons of laughter. I started to feel bad for him. It seemed like this person was really suffering from some sort of crazed delusion. While the man was interrogating the other fairgoers, we used the opportunity to make our way to the main entrance. Honestly, we were just done with the guy and done with the night. He was starting to get concerning, and we really didn't want no trouble or to have something happen for any of our parents to get involved. Once we got to the main entrance, we took a shuttle back to the parking lot where my mom was picking me up along with 3 of my friends. We got to the lot. She was not there yet, so we just waited by the entrance to the lot until my mom got there. Right on cue, directly across from the lot, which is essentially a heavily wooded area, we saw the same guy just standing there, staring at us. We didn't say or do anything to provoke him this time. We just watched and waited anxiously for my mom. As he stood there, we noticed that the man just kept pointing at the sky. He didn't look like he was saying anything, but we wouldn't have been able to hear him if he was anyways. Maybe he was at least 100 yards away. In the distance, we finally saw my mom driving in a green Windstar van. As we approached the doors of the van, we noticed the man was now somewhat rapidly approaching us. Not running, but walking briskly, I would say. We started to move fast, not really knowing if this guy was dangerous or not. And as I got into the passenger side, the man waved from the side of the road. I just barely heard him say, "I'll see you up there," as he smiled awkwardly at the van.
A summoner has
It wasn't until years later when I was telling the story that I realized just how disturbing it really was. We had no idea if this guy could have caused us harm, if he was insane, or if by some crazy chance there was some truth to his crazy delusion. I often used to wonder what happened to that guy, as I never saw him again. I still attend the fair every year, and honestly, I will always go back to that spot at the back of the grounds to see if the strange man ever does come back. Either way, it was a very strange and interesting story I really wanted to share, And it just makes you wonder what goes on in other people's minds and what their true intentions are.